Welcome to the Sherpa Chalet on Mount Podcastia, where it's time for podcast picks with Jim the Podcast Sherpa. You'll get to hear about podcast recommendations for your podcast playlist, along with occasional interviews with other podcasters and video hosts. Now waiting for you is your host, Jim the Podcast Sherpa. He's just like you imagined. But don't worry. We'll make it up to you somehow.
Podcast Picks with Jim the Podcast Sherpa welcomes author Marc Hartzman to the Sherpa Chalet. He's written numerous books on various interesting and unusual topics and hosts podcasts on unusual history and sword swallowing. We're keeping our fingers crossed that the Sherpa doesn't show him his collection of Oscar Homolka Cabbage Patch dolls. Now, that's something that would be hard to swallow.
Welcome to the Sherpa's Podcast Picks. It's the podcast about, podcasts. And now, coming to you from Mount Podcastia, here's your host who wonders what's on your podcast playlist, Jim the Podcast Sherpa.
Hello there, Rebels of the Sherpalution, and welcome to Podcast Picks with Jim the Podcast Sherpa. That is me. That's at least what the sticker that's stuck to my shirt says. And I am coming to you from Sherpa-lu Studios here in the Sherpa Chalet, high atop Mount Podcastia, where I overlook the millions of podcasts that are out there. And we have a podcaster episode. Yay! I know it's been a while. Some of you have probably been patiently waiting. Some of you who are like, who's this guy again? Well, either way, you are in for a treat. But I want to tell you a little bit of trivia. This is something that I heard, and I think it's true. Country singer Garth Brooks, who is not our guest this week, by the way, they said that when he puts his albums together, the last track on the album is his favorite one. The reason why I bring that up is this is one of my favorite episodes probably this season because it's just very fun and very educational, and we have such a great guest. So normally I have a lot of my favorite episodes as episode 25. Not to take away from the other episodes during the season, but some of them just stand out a little bit more, and they're a lot more fun. And this is a particularly enjoyable interview for me. It's only episode, I believe, 23. So pretend it's 25, but keep listening because we will have more episodes coming up before the season finale, of course. Okay, now that I've gotten that out of the way, let's talk a little bit about my guest today.
Who's our guest today, Sherpa?
His name is Marc Hartzman. Normally, he is a creative director in the advertising world, but Marc has written 9 books, with the 10th coming out in 2026, and he is the host of 2 podcasts, Weird Historian and To the Hilt, a history of sword swallowing. So you can imagine that this conversation was really going to be fascinating. And so even when I looked up some information about him on his website, I knew this was going to be a fun conversation. And I got to tell you, this gentleman did not disappoint. We had a lot of fun talking. This is a conversation you're going to enjoy, and you're really going to learn a lot too. He's a fascinating guy. And I mean, apart from the unique podcast that he does, he's lived an interesting life. I mean, some of the things that we didn't even mention in the interview, and this is true. Marc has been featured on the Travel Channel's Mysteries at the Museum as an expert on missile mail, on the History Channel's Unexplained with William Shatner. And he discussed the weird Wild West, and he's also talked about the history of Mars on 2 episodes of Exploration Outer Space. He was on the Maury Povich show with a friend of his who was a bearded lady, and he helped her reunite with her long-lost son. I think I mentioned this one during the interview, but CNN's Jeannie Mose actually went to his apartment to film his collection of eBay oddities because he wrote a book found on eBay, and we're going to get into that into the interview. You really get a kick out of it, trust me. So there's really a lot of neat stuff that we really didn't even get to, but the stuff that you're going to hear, I think you're really going to enjoy. Fun interview. Let's get into my conversation with Mr. Marc Hartzman, author and host of Weird Historian and To the Hilt. Hello there, Rebels. We are here in the Weird and Wacky newsroom in the Sherpa Chalet. My guest today is coming to us from lovely upstate New York. His name is Marc Hartzman. Marc is a creative director in the advertising field, But when he's not doing that, he has authored 9 books, with the 10th book coming out in January of 2026, and is also a podcaster who has not one, but 2, count 'em, 2 podcasts, as I like to say. Weird Historian and To the Hilt, a history of sword swallowing. So this ain't going to be a boring interview, folks. Marc, welcome to the show.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Good to be here.
I'm going to guess that you've had this fascination with circuses and Ripley's Believe It or Not since you were a kid.
That's right. Yeah, I've really been fascinated by human oddity since I was a little kid, and I blame that on the Guinness Book of Records
Okay.
primarily. I used to get those, that was back in the day when they were like a brick size paperback with
Right.
pictures, pre-internet. So every year you get a new edition with mostly the same records in it, but it always started off with I think the section was called The Human Body, was that first section. So the
Mhm.
first pages of the book or whatever. And each year there might be some different pictures. So it was very exciting. And I was the most fascinated by the world's tallest man ever, Robert Wadlow, who was 8 feet, 11 and a half inches tall. And that's not an exaggeration. Like a lot of circus giants, their heights might be exaggerated. This guy really was almost 9 feet tall. And he would have been 9 feet tall because he was still growing when he died at age 22. He died from a blister on his foot that got infected and, resulted in a 106-degree temperature. By the time they could treat him, that was just too much. But I just found the pictures of him and his story just remarkable. I mean, to this day, I have a, book, a book that was written about him in the 40s, and the photos, it's just filled with photography, and it's just amazing to see the size difference of this man next to grown people. So I always loved it since then. I saw The Elephant Man when I was a little kid, the David Lynch film. Probably too young to see that movie when I saw it, but it stayed in my head quite a bit. Loved Ripley's Believe It or Not. So yeah, all those things are just kind of led me on this path.
It's funny that you mentioned Mr. Ludlow, because a number of years back, my wife and I were at a train station, and we were just sitting around, and we hear this woman say, "Do you mind if I have a picture taken with you?" And we turn around, and she's with 2 guys, and one of them, and she asks them how tall they are. And one of them says 7'5". The other guy said 7'7". Now, you're saying Ludlow is almost 9 feet tall. He
Well,
would tower
almost,
over these
yeah.
guys by like a head and a half.
Oh yeah. Yeah. It's exactly. I mean, it's hard to believe that someone was that big. And like I said, still growing. There's the kid now at the University of Florida who's 7'9", and you can find video of him playing basketball when he's like 12,
Mhm.
and he's gigantic, and it's like little kids are playing with him because they're also 12,
Right.
but it just looks ridiculous. Like, who's this grown man on the court with these little kids, but he's the same age? I mean, it's incredible. And yeah, again, that guy's over a foot shorter than Wadlow was. So yeah, to me, it's one of these things. It's incredible to see the different shapes and sizes the human body can take on, and how those people dealt with those anomalies, which is one thing I love about sideshows. I wrote a book called American Sideshow that came out in 2005. And part of the reason I wanted to do that was I wanted the kind of book that I wanted to read, which was stories about these amazing, remarkable people who lived incredible lives. They were people who at that time when they were performing really didn't have any other opportunities. There weren't other job openings for them.
Right.
They could have been institutionalized by families if they didn't have a sideshow to go to, or hidden away that, families would be ashamed of someone with deformities or whatever. It's just the way the times were. But these people made a lot of money. They saw the world. They traveled to places they never would have seen before. They had camaraderie with each other. They found love. They had families. And I find them, for the most part, to be pretty inspirational stories. Of course, there's some that aren't so great, but
Right.
many of them really were. So, the book tells these stories and shares lots of photos. So it was a really wonderful project to be able to do. And I've since written many other books. You mentioned the number, kind of taking me to different weird territories. But I recently came back to Sideshow with To the Hilt, which is the podcast and a book it's a sword swallower's history of sword swallowing, because I co-wrote it and I do the podcast with my co-author Dan Meyer, who's a world-renowned sword swallower. So it's been quite fun to get back and come full circle to the sideshow world.
You know what's always been confusing to me, I guess a little puzzling rather. How did someone know when sword swallowing was safe? Because obviously, this is, obviously an art that, and we're not encouraging our listeners to just go out and do it or anything like that.
No, there's no-
But how would they know? I mean, what was the starting point, and what was the other point where we're like, oh, someone stuck a sword down their throat and killed themselves?
Yeah, that's a very good question. And first of all, no one knows an exact answer to that, but I did write something about that as well. Like, who said, "Hey, let's see if I can push this thing down my throat." Like, oh no, I can't. Well, let me try it. 18 people later, someone finally got it. We don't really know. I mean, it's generally speaking, people say it dates back to ancient India with the different fakirs that could do amazing things, or
Mhm.
different different performers, whether it was for religious reasons to show the power of God within them. So there's different ways it may have started. Some of them were just again showing that they were sort of superhuman in some way, or they should be respected in some way.
Mhm.
Um, so yeah, we don't know exactly like a starting point of who that first person was, but eventually it found its way up through uh, the Far East and into Europe, and eventually made its way over to America in the early 1800s.
I remember, and you could please correct me on this. Wasn't there a while back where there were swallowers that would use I guess like a fluorescent type of pole, and they would put it down their
Yeah,
throat, and then they would light it up so you could see that it was in their throat?
exactly. They would, a lot of them, and people still do it today, will swallow a neon tube or another kind of tube with a light. It's safer. Neon's
Mhm.
very dangerous.
Right.
But yeah, glass tube. So they would swallow, then they dim the lights, and then they could turn on the neon tube, and you would see the tube glowing in their throat, um, which is a pretty amazing effect. And the reason that that was something that they wanted to do was because so many people, and to this day, just don't believe it's real.
Right.
People I told I was working on the book said, "Oh, that's not real, though, is it?" I'm like, "Yes, it's real. These people are really risking their lives every time to do this for your entertainment." And that was just a way to show, okay, look, you can see it's glowing in my throat. It's not going up into some kind of handle. Not that the neon tube has a handle.
Right.
That's another reason why sword swallowers will either stab a sword into some block of wood to show this thing's real, pass it around so people can hold it and see it for themselves. They can't find a magic button for the blade to retract into a handle. They'll swallow other objects, giant shears, for example, or giant screwdriver, or a car axle. There's a guy, Red Stewart, who swallows a car axle. So just all these different crazy, large, sharp, pointy things that have nothing for a hand or a blade to retract into. And of course, the sword, and none of the swords don't do that. It's completely real. It takes a lot of training and obviously a lot of dedication and a real desire to do it. And as we say in the book, please don't try it at home. These people, risk, like I said, they risk their lives, and there have been plenty of accidents, and there have been deaths from sword swallowing. So it's very real, and it's very, very dangerous as well.
Now
I have no desire to try it.
okay. That was going to be my next question. If you've ever tried it, but your
No, no.
co-host obviously has, and he's done it professionally.
Dan actually makes his living as a sword swallower. He travels the world swallowing swords. He's done a TED talk about sword swallowing, and which is incredibly popular and successful. It's a really great talk. And yeah, he gives a very inspirational performance about just overcoming the impossible when he does his routine. So it's it's an amazing thing. It really is showing that you can do the impossible, swallowing a sword. Very, very few people on this planet have ever done it. And yeah, it's a remarkable skill. And these people have incredible stories of how they got to where they got, what they did, the different stunts they could perform, and the different lives they led. So that's what To the Hilt gets into. It's got more than 80 biographies of historical sword swallowers, tons of images. Dan has his entire inspirational story at the beginning. And then we spoke with a lot of modern day sword swallowers who we feature on the podcast, sharing their stories of how they learned or accidents they've had, or interactions with audience members that went awry in some way. Sometimes they'll call people up from the audience to pull the blade out of their throat. So they swallow it, bend over and say, okay, pull the blade out. And a few people told us how people got confused with that simple instruction and pushed the sword instead of pull it, which sounds horrifying. And thankfully they were able to I guess back up quick enough and then stop the action. But what are you doing?
Ooh.
How'd you get confused on which way the pull or
Yeah.
direction with the sword was there? It's clearly pull, not push.
When they say out, they should just point upward.
Yeah.
This is
gosh.
direction.
I can't even imagine. So, yes, it's filled with all kinds of really, like I said, extraordinary stories.
Now, I guess we should also mention that, I mean, as you said, that how much you loved the Guinness Book of World Records, but you're in it now also.
I'm in Record Holders Republic.
Okay.
Yeah, as the world's greatest lightweight juggler.
So is that just the weight of the items that you're juggling? Is that how they
They're
rank
very
that?
small, tiny. So the first one I did was with cashews, salted cashews. And so I was juggling cashews for 30 seconds, the most number of juggles within 30 seconds. And then I did pumpkin seeds, which was very difficult because pumpkin seeds, not only are they small, but there's really, they're colorless, right? They're basically
Sure.
beige, so there's not much for the eye to track because they're also very thin. And so that means they also easily can slip between your fingers. So not only does something small, it's harder to track with your eyeballs, but also easier to bounce off your hand and slip through the fingers. So that was a tough one. I did M&Ms. That was easier because they had color and a bit more weight. So that was a little bit easier. I did unpopped popcorn kernels. That was a hard one. I think I did jelly beans. It's been a few years now since I did that, but yeah, that was kind of a fun little thing to do.
How many do you do at once? I mean, is it usually just three and just keeping it going?
3, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
One
Just
would be enough for me anyway.
The standard juggling. Yeah, 3.
Okay. Because I know there's some that, they'll do a little bit more than that, or sometimes if they're working with a partner and they'll have 6 or 7 things that are going back and forth and
Yeah, that's very, very difficult.
Yeah.
Those guys are incredible.
You haven't elevated to chainsaws or anything like that.
No. I mean, I juggle normal objects, which I love to do. And when I got into juggling, I didn't start juggling till college, and then I kind of loved it, and I got into other things like the Diabolo and clubs. I bought a unicycle when I was 25 and learned to ride a unicycle. So I called it my little bit of clownism. And I got good at these things, and not like I could go perform, but then the lightweight juggling was just something, no one else was doing. And I kind of found I could do this pretty well. And a friend of mine is the great Thodini, who is the president of the Record Holders Republics for the U.S. division. So he said, hey, you could set a record doing this. So he documented everything and became a real thing. I got the certificate and everything.
Wow.
Yeah.
That is wild. And I know you've also written books about Mars as well.
Yes. Yeah, that's actually, I think, my favorite book. I know we're talking all this other sort of weird stuff, but Mars is really weird too. So I found my way into Mars very unexpectedly. I never thought I would write a book on that topic at all. Not that I don't like Mars or didn't like Mars, but it just wasn't something I thought about much. But this actually gets back to my website, my other podcast, Weird Historian.
Mhm.
So when I started that at the end of 2016, I had some stories I'd written for other projects and some stuff I wrote when I was freelancing for HuffPost, and I had written for AOL Weird News before that. So I've been writing about weird stuff for many, many years. And so I got Weird Historian going with some of that content, but then I needed to start writing some new stuff to keep it going. And I remembered hearing somewhere about Nikola Tesla trying to do something with Mars, contact Mars in some way. I just had a vague notion of it from reading something somewhere at some point. So I started digging into that a little bit, going through Google's newspaper archives at the time. And I came across this headline from 1926 about a a London lawyer who was having telepathic communications with a Martian woman named Umaruru. And she had big ears and was 7 feet tall. And I was like, what is this? So I put Tesla aside for the moment and I dug into this Umaruru story, Martian telepathy. And I uncovered a lot more stories written about her and this guy and efforts to contact the Martians during 19 October of 1926 and 28, both years when Mars was in opposition to Earth, meaning its closest point in its orbit. So about 35 million miles away at that point. So I thought, well, let's try and send a signal from the Rugby radio tower, which was the most powerful radio tower in the world at that time in London, run by the post office. So the post office agreed to do this, send this telegram to Mars for its long distance rate, which I thought was kind of funny. And they were getting publicity out of this. Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah. And of course, we didn't hear anything back. And then he blamed our scientists for not being able to receive the Martian messages and said that the Martian scientists were laughing at us because we weren't smart enough yet. And the more I dug into this, the more I kind of uncovered all these things going on in the periphery around that time. And then going back into the late 1800s, and it goes back further than that, even about all these different scientific beliefs in intelligent Martians and the reasons why people were believing this. And I was so fascinated by these stories I'd never heard before. And they all kind of started to add up to give context to the 1938 War of the Worlds broadcast by Orson Welles, which of course I knew about growing up as a kid, that people, were panicked in the streets thinking the Martians invaded. And it seems so silly. But all of a sudden I'm finding all these big name scientists, and Tesla included, by the way, because of course I found the stuff I was looking for in him, Marconi, William H. Pickering, head astronomer at Harvard. All these guys were having different theories on how we could send messages to Mars or receive messages from Mars, what Martians might look like based on the physics of the planet, the atmosphere, the 1/3 gravity, all these different things. And those many of these were making front page headlines on papers like the New York Times. So trusted sources were telling everybody that there were Martians out there and they were more intelligent than us, more advanced than us. So it doesn't seem that shocking knowing that context that for decades people have been primed to think when they turned on the radio and heard that dramatization and missed the beginning that said that it was a dramatization, by the way, because they were listening to a ventriloquist on the radio and they missed the beginning. Let's repeat that. They were listening to a ventriloquist
On the radio.
Charlie McCarthy and Edgar Bergen. So anyway, it starts to make a bit more sense that like they might believe that because he put that broadcast together in such a brilliant way that everything was done so realistically. The breaking in on the band playing and the interviews with people and the emergency breakthroughs, which were also not that uncommon as World War II was breaking out. So he used everything in this new medium, relatively new medium, to his advantage, and it was just a brilliant broadcast. But had those consequences, unfortunately. So anyway, I was actually pitching this as a book of Martians initially, and then my publisher, Quark Books, said, let's do it about Mars, and it became the Big Book of Mars. And all of a sudden, I found myself learning much more about the planet Mars itself and interviewing NASA scientists, getting planetary science lessons from these brilliant scientists. And one of them was a planetary scientist at Cornell who was the guy who, his name was Steve Squires. He basically was responsible for the Spirit Opportunity rover programs with NASA. I spoke with Gentry Lee, who was my favorite title ever. He's the chief engineer of the Solar System Exploration Directorate at NASA JPL, worked on Viking back in the 70s. Spoke with two of the Viking experimenters who had one of the experiments on Viking, the two landers, which was called the labeled release experiment, which came back positive for its test for life in the Martian soil. And NASA disputed their data. They held on to their data till their dying days. Those tests were never repeated. So a lot of fascinating stories in the Big Book of Mars. I really love that book. And it took me on a journey, like I said, I never expected to go on. But I learned so much. It's so fascinating. It's got pop culture. It's got NASA lore. It's got the Martians. It's got future challenges. And like I said, just tons of interviews with truly brilliant people.
Do you personally believe that there's life on Mars or other planets?
I do. Yeah, I think, when I say life on Mars, not the Martians like they were writing
Right.
about the early 1900s, but you know, hearing from Gil Levin and Pat Stratt, the two who had the label release experiment on Viking and their data and how certain they were of their data. And that was basically just detecting something like a microorganism beneath the soil, um, uh, metabolizing a radioactive nutrient, basically. And so when you think about it, for there to be microbes living beneath the soil seems quite possible because, first of all, beneath the soil, you're protected from the solar radiation, which is incredibly deadly on Mars for life. But beneath the soil, we know that there's ice well beneath the soil, beneath the surface, right? That's been discovered. There's lots of water basically there. So you have what we believe, at least here on Earth, is a main ingredient for life. And I'm sure Mars in our solar system, it's not totally different, right? So,
Right.
an ingredient for life there, one would think as well. Um, and we know that most life on Earth is beneath ground. And we know we have extremophiles here that can live, a mile beneath the surface and never see sunlight and still find a way to live. So it's not hard to imagine that life could be living beneath the soil. Again, it won't be like some big weird creature. It's probably going to be something more microbial, but it seems quite possible it's there. Then there's other places like, um, there could be. I think it's Titan has. No, it's not Titan. It's the other one. I'm sorry, I'm blanking on the name right now. But there's one of the moons,
Europa?
Europa. Thank you. Yeah, has like a 10-mile sheet of ice on top of its ocean. And then there's a massively deep ocean beneath 10 miles of ice, so
Right.
who knows what could be lurking there, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So, I don't know, all those things are interesting, and I've explored the bigger question of life out there in my more recent book, We Are Not Alone, also from Quirk Books,
Mhm.
about the history of aliens and UFOs, and there's a lot of really fascinating stories there, and with that book, it was interesting because I go in without a particular agenda to say one thing or another. I love the stories. But I had the scientists like on one shoulder and the experiencers on the other, you know, sharing the different theories and beliefs and like I said, experiences. So it definitely leaves you wondering a lot. Could something have visited us in the past? Could there be something out there? Or or the science, at least as we know it, say, okay, well, there's not enough data to prove any of it, which of course, we haven't seen solid proof of it.
Mhm.
Is the distance too great to traverse? And does the timeline, is it even possible for the timelines to line up? Maybe there is intelligent life out there elsewhere in the this galaxy or other galaxies, but could it get here at the time when it's at its peak of intelligence and ability to travel, and we're here to receive that? Maybe it got here millions of years ago before we were here, and there was nothing that looked like Mars or something,
Right.
They just moved on.
Right. You
Or
see the
who
empty
knows?
parking lot before the store goes up, so you figure,
Yeah. Or maybe who knows? Maybe we're it, and as we start to expand out into the universe, we're gonna start planting life out there, and
yeah.
we'll be the ones populating the galaxy. Who knows? But it's all fascinating to talk about and to conjecture, and lots of fun theories. There are lots of arguments both ways, which are, again, they're fun to discuss. One thing I did find interesting was knowing, despite the numbers of planets and exoplanets, within the galaxy, we're sort of a little bit on the outer edge of the Milky Way, and that's a pretty safe area to be. Other places closer in, there's gamma ray bursts, which can just stars can explode and destroy all the planets in its path,
Mhm.
like that, and just wipe out anything that may have been developing. So we're fortunate to be where we are, and we're fortunate to be here at all, just given the history of this planet. Dinosaurs were here for hundreds of millions of years, and that giant asteroid hits or they die out, some mammals scurry to safety and eventually develop into us, and suddenly we're here.
Yeah.
But, that didn't have to happen.
That's right.
So, yeah,
And look
like I
where we are
said,
today.
these these debates can go on and on, but they're definitely fun, and like I said, I love them because I just find them fascinating in both directions.
Yeah. There were two other books that you've written that I wanted to kind of touch on. Uh, Found on eBay.
Yeah, my first book.
And these are the weird things that you can find on eBay. And you were interviewed on CNN, right? Because of
Yeah.
some of the things that you own.
Yeah, we ended up buying a bunch of them just so we could get some great photos, and some things I wanted anyway, but we definitely got a pretty weird collection. And that book was a lot of fun because it was just finding the truly bizarre things that I think everyone would agree that's weird. Lots of things can be subjectively weird, but objectively speaking, a paperweight made from deer poop with in a crystal glass with little, snowflake things around it. It was called a Pooperweight. I mean, that's pretty weird. Everyone would agree. And so I had a bit more fun with it too. I would write the sellers really weird questions, like really weird stuff, and just see how they would respond. Like for the Pooperweight, for example, I told her that I was a animal droppings collector, and I was collecting droppings from around the country. And I was curious if she knew where she collected it to see if it was an area that I was targeting for my collection. So she, then every seller wants to make a sale, so they're going to take you seriously. And she said, "Oh, the deer poop was found in Massachusetts, but I've also got moose poop from Maine." You know, selling me on other stuff, trying to upsell. So the book reprints a lot of the correspondences I have with a bunch of these sellers, which was really, like I said, quite entertaining. Made me laugh a lot. So hopefully it
Yeah.
makes the readers laugh as well. Lots
Of course,
amazing
yeah, with
photography.
animal poop, there's nowhere to go but up. So,
Yeah.
what is the strangest thing that you've purchased from eBay, in your opinion?
I think the weirdest thing I got was a goat toenail bracelet. That one's really weird. The goat toenails they're very large. I don't know if you've seen a goat toenail, but they're
Can't say I
big.
have.
And there's a lot of them on like a rainbow knitted band. And that's just a bizarre thing to have. And who made this thing and why? So many mysteries.
Okay, and the other book, God Made Me Do It.
Yeah, yeah. That was a fun one. So that one, I think, you hear people always either thank God for something that happened, like for winning a game or whatever, or blame God for something. And I just thought, oh, how is God so busy with all these things when there's like more serious issues going on in the world? If he's a football fan, what is he? He likes this team this year, and next year he likes this team, and he's the biggest fair weather fan of all. I mean, it's just crazy. So I started researching that to see what I could dig up, and I just found that so much material. So the book basically gives real quotes from various news articles over the past 100 or so years where people said, God told me to do this, or the Lord told me to do that. And it's all kinds of crazy things, from building a giant, Jesus with 30,000 toothpicks to cutting off an arm to juggling outside of someone's hospice to, just all kinds of crazy, weird things. And then I just give some context to the story, what was going on with that particular quote.
Mhm.
So it's a fun book, the kind of thing you can flip to any page and just find something totally crazy and wacky.
Wasn't there one about a woman directing traffic topless or something like that?
Yeah, yeah. That was a woman in Florida. God told her to direct traffic topless. Of course, that caused some problems, as you might more traffic.
Yeah, I can imagine. I can imagine. Okay, now, so if I'm in a bookstore and I see a title that says "The Embalmed Head of Oliver Cromwell: A Memoir," I'm certainly going to stop in my tracks.
Oh, good. Yeah, that's a really amazing story. So I was looking for. I'm always jotting down ideas for new books,
Mhm.
and I keep a list of things. And one idea I had was to write about posthumous adventures of body parts. And I started researching and making notes on different stories, just kind of gathering information. And I came across Oliver Cromwell's embalmed head. Um, for those who might not know Oliver Cromwell, he was a huge figure in English history. He was the Lord Protector of England, Ireland, and Scotland in the late mid 1600s. Basically, during the English Civil War, he led the charge to have Charles I beheaded, which ended the monarchy. And then he took over as Lord Protector. And when he passed away in 1658, his son took over, but then abdicated, and Charles II restored the monarchy. And that's why there's still monarchy today. Right now, we
Right.
have Charles III. So, quick little history lesson. But Cromwell was exhumed by Charles II, who was a little upset that his dad got beheaded by Cromwell. So he exhumed the body, which had been embalmed and buried in Westminster Abbey, and then he hanged the body and then beheaded it and discarded the body and then put the head on a pike atop Westminster Hall, where it sat for 25 years, just to remind people, don't try regicide.
Right.
And then a storm eventually knocked the head off with the spike still going through the skull, on the wooden stake, and it fell to the ground and got picked up by a sentry and taken home. And the sentry hid it in his chimney, where it stayed till he was on his deathbed. And he told his family he had Cromwell's head in the chimney. They took it out. They sold it to a guy who had like an early cabinet of curiosities type of museum. He kept it for a while, and then eventually it went on to another distant family member who kept it for a while. And it just got passed on and on until it ended up in the family named Wilkinson for 5 generations, which lasted 150 years. So all in all, Cromwell's embalmed head, traveled for 300 years. It was reburied in 1960 in the antechapel of Sidney Sussex College at Cambridge, where he went for a year. So when I found this out, I thought, wow, 300 years of travels for this head. So I decided to put my other idea aside, which, by the way, around that time, I also found out that there was already a book written like that called Rest in Pieces by someone who's become a friend since then, Bess Lovejoy. So I'm glad I didn't pursue that, because it would have been, it was too late for that idea anyway. But I got so intrigued by the idea of a memoir written from the perspective of this head across 300 years of history. And once that idea was in my head, I had to write this book. And so the book goes through all those real adventures that the head had, which are all sort of been documented in various books and articles and newspapers and letters. So I was able to do a ton of research on that. I went to Sidney Sussex and went through their archives and, pulled out all this amazing stuff going back to the 1700s, all these documents about the head. So it was really extraordinary to go through all that. And not only does it take you through that journey, but he's giving you observations of what was going on in history for 300 years.
Mhm.
So there's a lot of real history, but I have a lot of imagined anecdotes in it, obviously, to carry the story along and to fill in gaps. And I'm able to weave in a lot of other stories and characters that were around during those times, because that's a long period of time, obviously. So I could kind of weave in these interactions he was having with, like, the Elephant Man, for example. I mentioned my fascination with the Elephant Man, so I have him encounter the Elephant Man. Um, and then also kind of get into a little bit of the idea of, can consciousness survive after death, and thoughts I've had since I was young, very young, about burial, and if that's wrong, or are we trapped beneath the ground if we're buried? And was Cromwell really freed by being exhumed to experience the world around him, but unable to communicate with anyone else? With anyone, unless they were dead, he could communicate with other exhumed beings, I suppose you could say. I have talking with Joseph Haydn's head, which traveled for 145 years. They meet at a phrenologist's office, because there was a phrenologist who studied, well, both of their heads were studied by phrenologists, so that kind of makes sense that they might encounter each other, maybe.
It sounds like a setup for a weird joke, doesn't it?
What's that?
It sounds like a setup for a weird joke. 2 embalmed heads are in a professor's office.
Yeah, right. Right. So yeah, it was a really fun, challenging book for me to do, but I love telling the story, and again, kind of weaving in various thoughts and philosophies about life after death and some humor along the way. So yeah, it's a fun one that came out in 2015.
And since we're talking about life after death, Chasing Ghosts is another one of your publications.
Yeah, that was another book through Quirk Books, came out in 2021. Obviously, kind of gets into the same thing about, like you said, life after death. Are there ghosts? Can we talk to spirits? And that one kind of stemmed from my fascination with spiritualism, this religion that was really at its peak in the mid to late 1800s and the early 1900s, where millions of people really believed we could speak with the dead. Mediums were, having seances and manifesting these amazing experiences in the seance room, whether it was voices or ectoplasm or things moving or, tables levitating, all sorts of incredible things. And a lot of people really believed it. So I tell a lot of those stories, how that all began.
Mhm.
I get into some of the scientific explorations of ways to either find evidence of ghosts or to understand how scientifically certain physics might explain why we think we're seeing ghosts, but doesn't explain everything. So
Right.
it covers a pretty wide range of ghosts and spirits. But again, a really fun topic I really enjoyed exploring.
And I know historically, did they say that Houdini uh, had set up actually, I think, a code word with his wife? And he said, like, if you ever go to a seance and you hear this word, then it's me. But like they said that so far, it like never happened. Like the word never
Yeah.
arose from any of the seances that she went to.
Yeah, that's right. And I wrote about Houdini a bit in Chasing Ghosts because he was he was someone who would have liked to believe that it could happen. He wasn't
Mhm.
closed-minded to it, but he did really despise the mediums for what they were doing, basically taking money from people who were grieving and making them believe it was real. So he went to great efforts to expose as many fraudulent mediums as he could.
Mhm.
And he did a lot. He had a team working with him on this. So I talked about that kind of in general, but then also his experiences with Mina Crandon, who was known as Marjorie, the Witch of Lime Street, a Boston medium, which is a pretty incredible story. Scientific American was ready to award her a $5,000 prize for being an authentic medium, and Houdini stepped in. He was on the judging panel, but hadn't been available for the early seances. They said, hold on a second, let me check it out myself. And of course, was not convinced. And his relationship with Arthur Conan Doyle, who was a huge believer in spiritualism, author of Sherlock Holmes, was a huge evangelist for spiritualism. And he and Houdini were friends, but that friendship got a little tricky when Doyle had his wife give a reading to Houdini, supposedly from Houdini's mother. And Houdini said, "This is 15 pages of English, and my mother never spoke English. I don't think she would talk to me in English from the dead." And say, "Oh, you call my wife a liar?" So that put a bit of a damper on their friendship afterward.
Okay, and your upcoming book, which will be, as you said, January of 2026. I got the title right here. This is your 10th book. It's called "You're Not Supposed to Know About This: One Man's Deep Dive into the Government's Secret Projects to Control Minds, Train Animal Spies, and Secure American Dominance at all costs." Now, a lot of the things that already happened in history, right? This isn't just something recent, right? Even like during the history of the Cold War and stuff like that.
Yeah, yeah. In fact, that might need to update my site if that was on my site. The title's actually changed. It's now called Exploding Cigars and Psychic Spies.
Oh, okay.
But same concept. It's a history of these top secret government projects. And these are all things that really happened. This is not conspiracy theory stuff. This is real things that really happened. And yeah, it's a lot of it's Cold War era, World
Mhm.
War II and Cold War, um, CIA stuff, FBI, just so many extraordinary programs. Whether it was MK Ultra, trying to find a way to figure out mind control, competing with the Russians, the psychic spies with remote viewing. I had a cool experience myself taking a remote viewing class with one of the men from one of the army soldiers who was in the program, and interviewed again a ton of people who've been involved in these programs. So I'm really excited for that one to come out. That was a very challenging book to write. Just so much to learn, so much different kinds of history to get into and programs to write about. So yeah, I'm looking forward to that one being released and hope everyone loves it and is as fascinated as I was writing it.
No mysterious people showing up at your door or anything like that saying, "Maybe you wanna
No,
leave
not
this
yet.
out."
I did make note of that because I was digging into so many CIA files, and I was like, "That I wonder if they're noticing because I'm in here a lot." But nothing's happened yet, thankfully.
See, now you're lucky because this is an audio podcast, and on promotion, your picture won't be on there. So if anything gets given away, it's not from me, Mark.
Yeah.
Now, one thing about you that I find fascinating because I've actually gone, well, sort of the same route. You were a contestant on the Wheel of Fortune, and you
Yes.
and you got to. you got all the way to the bonus round.
I did. Yeah. I
Did you
had a
win?
lot of luck. I didn't win the bonus round. I was a little bummed about that, but I did really, really well in the regular game. I had, like I said, amazing luck. No bankrupts, no lose a turns.
Mhm.
Won a trip to Costa Rica, and I hit like one of the rounds. I hit the 3,500 and got it was that first letter category. So I think I got five S's, and then an extra 1,000 for getting the first letter, and ended up winning more than $26,000 on that puzzle alone. So
Wow.
I walked in that morning having no idea what to expect. I was just hoping to come home with something, even like $2,000 or something, just cover my airfare. Um, and I've never been like someone who was a diehard fan. My kids really were pushing for me to try out for it, so I did to, keep them happy and everything. And then all of a sudden, I had fun tryouts, and I enjoyed doing everything with it, the whole process. And then they got me on the show, and I couldn't believe it. It was a thrill of a lifetime.
Wow.
So yeah, I really loved it.
Yeah, a long time ago I took a test for Jeopardy, but I didn't do very well on it. But I was on a game show called The Million-Second Quiz that was hosted by Ryan Seacrest, and this was like a number of years back. And it was like a continuous thing. It continued on from prime time, even through the overnight. They had it on. You could like listen to it on the internet, we'll watch it on the internet, and everything like that. So I got to beat there. I didn't win anything. I got eliminated, in the round when I finally got to play at like 1:00 in the morning.
Oh wow.
But it was a fun
Yeah.
experience, though. I know
I'm
it's
sure.
just like a different world, right?
Yeah, it really was. I have to say, first of all, I want to say everyone on Wheel of Fortune was really fantastic. That whole staff, from the person who picked up the phone when I first called after getting an email about being accepted to
Mhm.
come try out, to coordinating the flights and then the travel plans to Costa Rica. I had to change everything due to COVID. So I was supposed to go that summer of 2020, so I
Oh.
had to get delayed a year. Pat and Vanna were extremely nice. I like as soon as I got out there and Pat Sajak comes out, it's amazing how he just puts you at ease like instantly. And I realized like, wow, no wonder this guy's done this for like 40 some years, because he just makes you so comfortable. Like he's just has this certain charm about him that,
Right.
you just get right into it, and then you're just playing the game.
Sure. I met Vanna White like a long time ago when she put out that book called Vanna Speaks, and it was at a book signing, and she autographed the book. But that was about the closest. And I've actually interviewed her brother on this very show. As a matter of
Oh,
fact, he's a
wow.
producer. He's a really nice
Oh,
guy.
cool.
His name is Chip White.
Yeah, she was very nice too. She came in the contestant room that morning and said hi to everybody, introduced herself, and then, we were chatting after the show a little bit. Like I said, they just seemed they very much were just like you see them on TV.
Yeah.
Just seem like real friendly, genuine people. So I really appreciated that.
Yeah, that is cool. All right, we got to jump back to the podcast for a little bit, and I want to really suggest to people to especially check out the Weird Historian website, because I was like doing the deep dive, and like I'm scrolling down and I'm seeing these unusual stories, and then I'm going further, and I was like, these are getting crazier and crazier. I'm going further, and like you'd said that you were fascinated by human oddities, and the website actually has pictures of these people, and you can imagine the type of lives that they lived. Did you ever see a circus sideshow at all, or
Yeah,
yeah?
yeah. They're still happening. Yeah,
Okay.
yeah. I mean, Coney Island has had one consistently since the 80s. I mean,
Mhm.
obviously there's a huge history of Coney Island, but then there was a bit of a gap. But yeah, they still have a show going on, right now, still in September. And then there's a few other traveling shows as well.
Mhm.
So yeah, there's still but it's what's called the working acts. There's still a few human oddities performing with them as well, but working acts are like the sword swallowers that we talked about, or doing
Right.
blockades where you hammer a nail into your nose, or fire eaters, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
Basically a trained skill.
Yeah. Again, do not try this at home, rebels.
no. Yeah.
I don't want to be responsible for why somebody's got a nail up into their
Me
brain
either.
or anything like that. Yeah. I don't want to think about that. And also, you said that your wife and your children are related to Mark Twain.
Oh, my wife is related. So therefore my kids as well. Yeah. Yeah. Which is
How
kind of cool.
do you know how far along? Was she like a great niece or something like that, or
Um, I think that is
distant cousin?
yeah. I forgot exactly if it was it's on her dad's side, and I think like his grandmother was a brother or cousin of Twain's parents, something like that, of the Clemens, on the Clemens side. One of her dad's relatives is a Clemens, and I can't remember if it's a cousin or sibling of Samuel Clemens. But anyway, it's there. We've got the tree somewhere.
I find it's interesting that a man who took up writing ended up
Yeah.
being married to somebody who was a descendant of
It's
one
kinda
of the
cool,
world's
yeah.
famous American writers.
Yeah. Yeah. In fact, I have another I also do I don't know if you saw this or not, but I do another thing on the side called Curious Publications. So
Yes.
curiouspublications.com. And I have a book coming out. Most of it's I'm republishing old, obscure public domain books and just bringing them back to life and formatting them, beautifully and making them, really nice books to, again, bringing them back from the dead, really. And a lot of them are about these weird things like spiritualism, for example. So one of them is something I actually edited together. So I wrote sort of an intro and then intros to the various people who were speaking from the dead. So I'm releasing this month an expanded edition. It's called The Talking Dead. Um, and one of them is Mark Twain, who wrote a whole novel through a Ouija board from the dead, if you choose to believe that. But
Mhm.
this is the story. It's a book called Jap Heron, written through a medium in, I think, 1917. It's a crazy story, not Jap Heron itself, but the story of this ghost writing it through the Ouija board. So I got to write about Mark Twain's ghost, at least in my own writings, which was pretty fun. And I wrote a bit about that in Chasing Ghosts as well. It's definitely a good one.
And wasn't there one about an elastic woman? Is that one of the?
Oh yeah, I did. This was a cool project. So after American Sideshow came out, a few years later, I got contacted by the great niece of a woman named Agnes Schwarzenbacher, who was a rubber skin lady in the Sideshow. She had very stretchy skin basically from her waist down. And she performed, primarily like the 1930s. So she worked a lot with Ripley's and other shows.
Mhm.
And this woman had this remarkable scrapbook from Agnes. And I love this thing. The cover of it. Imagine this woman when she was a young girl finding this scrapbook like hidden, I think, in her mom's attic. And on the cover of the scrapbook is two puppies that just look cute, right, and adorable. And then she opens it, and it's all these circus sideshow freaks on every page. Like, oh, I thought it was gonna be puppies. So she was telling me how no one in her family had any interest in it, and she didn't know what to do with it. And I'm like, this is incredible. I want to do something with this. So I did a thing on Ripley's radio about it, and I wrote a story about it for Mental Floss. And then during COVID, I finally was able to do what I've been wanting to do for years, which was reproduce the scrapbook. Her husband helped me with this. He photographed every page in the scrapbook beautifully, and then I laid it out. I wrote bios of everyone I could identify in the book at the back of the book, and I wrote an intro to the whole story about Agnes and how I came to meet this great niece, and our story together, and just reproduced every page exactly as it is in the scrapbook. So it's a complete replica. And I just did a limited edition. So I still have a few paperback copies left. They're all hand numbered, 100 copies. But really, it's a really incredible document of 1930s sideshow with her photos, cards, souvenir cards that she collected from her coworkers, I guess you would say, and newspaper clippings and family photos, and her notes as well. So it's really, like I said, an amazing document that you can't find anywhere else.
Sure. I mean, like I said, someone who's really studied and written about it, were you really getting like a front row seat to images and stories like that? That's got to be
Yeah.
like such a gold mine for you.
Yeah, yeah, I'm really glad I got that out
Now,
into the world.
we have something on the show, and it is called Shameless Self-Promotion. And this is where you can let everybody know where they can find out about all these great books and about your podcast, of course. So if you could let everybody know.
Yeah, thanks. So I have my author site is markhartzmanbooks.com, and I spell Mark with a C, so it's MarcHartzman books.com. I have weirdhistorian.com, which you mentioned, which, as you said, there's a ton of stuff there. You can just keep scrolling and find all sorts of fun, weird stuff. On Instagram, I'm just at weirdhistorian. Curiouspublications.com is my other side project I mentioned with The Talking Dead. I also put the Agnes, the Rubber Skin Lady scrapbook out through Curious Publications as well. And those are the main places you can find me. You can find me at Marc Hartzman on Instagram as well, just at Marc Hartzman altogether. So yeah, I'm pretty easy to find. But yeah, please check out the books. You can find them all on Amazon or BarnesNoble.com or bookshop.org. Anywhere you buy books, you can find them. And then of course check out the podcast. One of them is just Weird Historian, and the other one is To the Hilt with Dan Meyer. And we just put out 14 episodes talking to 14 different incredible sword swallowers. And one thing I love about that is I'm kind of like a bit of the fly on the wall as two sword swallowers are just talking shop.
Sure.
About, what it's like to swallow swords and what they've done and how they've dealt with injuries and their travels. And they're just crazy conversations you're not going to hear anywhere else. Two sword swallowers just going at it together, swapping stories, and I'm kind of there guiding things along and asking questions along the way. But it's really a fun thing to do, and it's I'm thrilled to be in a position to do it with Dan. Dan's an amazing guy, really terrific performer, and a good all around guy. So, please check it out. It's fairly new, and our book To the Hilt is a great new book as well. Beautiful hardcover, full color book with. No other book has ever been written on sword swallowing like this, so it's a pretty unique book.
And one last time, what's the title of the book that's coming out next year?
It's Exploding Cigars and Psychic Spies.
There you go. Exploding Cigars, Psychic Spies.
Yep.
If it's unusual and it's going on, this guy's got a hand on it somewhere. His name is Marc Hartzman. Thank you so much for coming on the show.
Yeah, thanks for having me. This was fun.
Listen and subscribe on podcast apps everywhere. And we're on YouTube at Sherpa-lution. Sorry, no video. You're welcome.
Thanks a lot for spending some time and listening to this show. And of course, a very special thanks to Mr. Marc Hartzman. Be sure to check out his podcasts and even his books and his websites. There is some fascinating and wild stories on there. If you want to check that out, I'm sure you will enjoy it very much. And if you're looking for the strange and the peculiar, you may not even have to look any further than that website. Trust me, definitely some wild stuff there. Hey, on Saturdays we do Sherpa Selects. And those are the episodes from the first 7 seasons of this podcast that I really like, that I'm trying to get out there on the YouTube channel. We're still back in the 2020 episodes. I think we're gradually going into the 2021s, just to give you an idea of how many have been loaded on there. But I'd like to give them the exposure that they need on YouTube and, of course, on open.video. Please feel free to swing by again on Saturday and check them out, or listen to them whenever it is convenient for you. So thanks so much, and we'll be back next week with another podcast. What's it going to be about? I don't know. I have an idea, but you'll have to wait until next week. But I will be here, and hopefully you will be here as well, and I will be looking forward to seeing you. Well, I won't see you, but you'll hear me. You know what I'm talking about. It's announcer stuff. Anyway, we're out of here, and until next time, Rebels, I say to you, Viva la Sherpa-lution.
Thanks for listening to the Sherpa's Podcast Picks. The podcast is now over. Please disperse and tell everyone about us. As long as they don't put us back in jail. Viva la Sherpa-lution!